Hi, I'm Liz White. I'm the executive director of UpVote Virginia. And joining me on the orange couch is Sheba Williams. Sheba is the executive director of Nolef Turns and one of the leaders of the Restoration of Rights Coalition happening here in Virginia. And we're really excited to talk to you about all of your work and voting rights and how we're all working together to make Virginia one of the easiest and most effective places to cast a vote. So, Shiva, can you tell us about No Left Turns?
Ooh, thank you for having me. No Left Turns was started in 2016, May 16th, 2016, and approximately a couple of months later, October 16th, 2016, myself and some board members were working at the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office for um, phone banking, calling people and letting them know they got their voting rights back after losing them due to felony disenfranchisement. The electoral board system kind of crashed that day, and that's how we got thrust into the fight for restoration rights and voting rights. Um, there was a mayoral debate at the Altria Theater. Reception was horrible. Couldn't get any calls till about 9 o'clock when we got outside, and so many people had flooded my phone with calls. And I realized that nobody's applications were being submitted to the electoral board site. So we kind of got into the fight that way. But we were started to be a direct service organization for individuals leaving long term incarceration. The whole goal was to get people back to work and help with housing. And then it expanded to voting rights because of that situation in particular.
Can you talk a little bit about the connection between, I guess, what feels like a direct, immediate need, housing and food and employment, and how voting fits into that?
So, for those who don't know, I am also directly impacted. I lost my voting rights for 9 years in 2004. I was sentenced to 5 years of probation, but I was disenfranchised for 9 years because of the rules around not being able to pay restitution in full and being released from probation. Um, didn't know anything about the law in that capacity at the time. But my probation officer was like, "Hey, I need to get you off my caseload." I was like, "Well, take me off." And she was like, "No, you have to pay restitution in full." And like for like those who don't know the back history, I was wrongfully convicted and I was angry. So I was paying the bare minimum. And then when she told me that, I ended up paying everything in full, getting my voting rights back. But I missed two big elections, 2008 and 2012. Uh, both of my parents were incarcerated when I was 10 years old. My mother and myself both got our voting rights back under a Republican governor, Bob McDonnell, in 2013. My dad, who was the center of a lawsuit against this administration, the Youngkin administration, in 2023, did not vote for the first time until November 2023 after being disenfranchised for a long time. I think it was something like 16 years or what have you. But yeah, we fight this fight, and a lot of people don't understand. Like there are like 46,000 collateral consequences after a conviction. That means that there are 46,000 plus things that you are denied access to after being convicted of a crime, not just a felony, but any crime. And that can be anything from chaperoning your kids on field trips to being able to be an organ donor recipient. You can always donate organs, but you may be denied if you have certain crimes. That includes being able to volunteer, sometimes being a court appointed special advocate. You don't get the opportunity to go to certain educational programs. You lose job opportunities. Your ability, I call felonization economic terrorism because of the amount of income you lose, not just in a household, but in a community because of a conviction. And the way that voting ties into that, every decision that affects a person's life is tied into that vote. And what that means is at the General Assembly every year, there's a budget that passes. It makes decisions about what teachers are paid, who gets access to benefits like SNAP and TANF, who gets climate like access, who gets solar panels, who gets their street lights fixed, who gets pothole fixed, who gets upgrades to their water system, like in Richmond where we had a crisis this year at the beginning of General Assembly. Dollars are allocated at every step, and that's not just at the state level or federal level, but at city council, at state school boards. everything that is tied into your livelihood and your life is tied to that vote and who represents you. So it's very important for people to understand that Virginia has an election or two or three every year, because sometimes we have special elections, we have primaries, and people don't tend to vote in these smaller elections, which are really important. They make the decisions about who represents you in at every level. So, obviously it's bigger than the vote, but everything that we care about in life is tied to the vote. Everything from whether or not you can make a decision about your loved one, final moments in care, whether or not a person can um, even get hospitalization services. We're seeing a big thing now where people are paying attention to, like, farming or healthcare, or what we call DEI, which is being mislabeled by a lot of groups, but affirmative action, even segregation. Like, we're seeing attacks on the 1964 Voting Rights Act that affect everything that people care about in their lives, no matter who you are, even people who are not affected by felony disenfranchisement.
That tell me that number again. It's 42,000,
46,000.
46,000 losses, types of loss after being convicted of a crime, accused of a crime.
Both.
But either, I guess, right? There's a
So in Virginia, like, we work on expungement and record sealing, which is the new thing where your record can be removed from public view, and even just an arrest. So your Virginia state background check is your arrest record, not just your conviction record. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, we look at things on a case by case basis, and we make decisions based on the outcome," but algorithms and computers are making decisions about who gets access to housing or education or employment based on just an arrest. There are individuals who I talk to every day who can't volunteer at certain organizations because of an arrest, not just a conviction. Obviously, I work with people with convictions. We do some pretrial support, but mostly people who are absolutely have been incarcerated. And, we subscribe to the notion that even a guilty person deserves dignity. So we work really hard to make sure that people have those needs met, those foundational needs met. But policy was necessary. Like, we had to get involved in the fight to change some of the laws in the state because, to me, very much against the nonprofit industrial complex that I am in, but it was kind of necessary. It was necessary for the upkeep of making sure that people had what they need. So in 2019, I think 2020, when the pandemic happened and all of the racial, like, uprisings happened, we raised $250,000 in small dollar donations because Governor Northam, former governor, sorry y'all, proposed releasing upwards of 2,000 people who were incarcerated in Department of Corrections, and they had to have somewhere to go. And we discovered at that time that there is no permanent housing options for people with records who are newly released, do not have income, credit, don't have a rental history. You have to make 3.5 times the rent sometimes, and they're just not there. So that's how we got involved in policy. And, you know, the rest is history.
well, now you're leading the charge on a big policy shift on a constitutional amendment that would allow incarcerated people to regain their voting rights as soon as their incarceration is over. I want to back up a step because I don't know that it's entirely common knowledge the unique way Virginia handles this currently. Can you talk about the current process such that there is one? How does someone go about getting their rights back? What do they lose? When do they lose them? And what's the process for getting them back currently?
Okay, a couple things. So, upon conviction of a felony, you lose your right to vote, your right to serve on a jury, your right to run for public office, and your right to be a notary public. With the current process, each sitting governor has the authority to change the process the way that they see fit. Um, Prior to this administration coming in, the Youngkin administration, the previous three governors restored the rights of over 300,000 Virginians. And the process changed in each administration, starting with Governor McDonald. And I won't say he started the process, but he started to streamline the process. It used to be something like a 38-page document where you had to get notarized copies, reference letters, and all these things to uh, request your rights back, and you had to explain the circumstances of your case, and talk about remorse and all of these things. Now it is a one-page process, and there's an online portal where you can submit your request. Before this administration came in, the process became submit your personally identifying information, whether or not you were convicted in a circuit court or a federal court, and ask if you still owe fines, fees, and restitution. You submitted your application. The information was vetted by I want to say 6-person team in the Restoration of Rights Office, which is housed in the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. And you would get a response in about a month, I'll say on average, a little bit longer if you had a federal charge, because they had to manually research whether or not you were released from the terms of incarceration. This administration came in about the end of 2022. They started to change the application and put a question on there whether or not you were convicted of a violent offense, and also if you owe fines, fees, and restitution, you needed to upload proof. Either proof that you paid in full or proof that you had a payment plan in place, which becomes a barrier if you're doing any type of drive, because most people don't have that information on hand. And not only that, a lot of people are leaving incarceration or transient, or they don't keep up with that information or what have you, and it puts a lot more work on the clerks to pull up the information and figure out how to upload all the things. This The current report that came out, which every year we produce a document called Senate Document 2 that talks about how many people got their rights back. For the third consecutive year, this administration has declined in the number of people who they've restored, and I think they only restored about 1,671, give or take, in 2024.
Down from about 300,000 a year in the three previous
Three previous.
administrations, which include Democrats and Republicans.
Yes.
And ultimately in Virginia, under current law, it comes down to the governor, right? To the governor's say
One
so, the
person.
governor's approval, one person, and not a lot of transparency associated with, again, the process.
So we sued.
What else are you going to do?
Fair Election Center and Nolef Turns started a lawsuit April 6, 2023, challenging the current restoration rights process because there is no transparency. There are no concrete details about what the criteria is, who makes the decision, where the information is coming from, what the time frame is for people getting an answer, because we had people waiting for years to get a response. And then we started seeing people getting a no with no explanation as to why, what they can do to improve their chances. And more recently than not, because we don't know exactly when this happened, the administration also put a note on there that said if you are denied, you now have to wait a year before you can apply again, which is a new thing that was never on the application before. So yeah, and not to mention, this administration also has erroneously purged different groups of people during the administration. 3,400 people were purged a week before election in 2023. And then 6,303 were purged for being non-citizens, and the fact is they were not non-citizens. They applied for like driver's license cards or permits at DMV, and at the time that they applied they were non-citizens, and then they were ultimately naturalized, and the process was never updated. So when they would go back to DMV and say, no, I don't need to put in a voter registration application because I'm already sufficient, they were purged from the voter rolls erroneously. I fight to not say illegally, but given the benefit of the doubt, we'll say erroneously.
So we just finished the 2025 session. UpVote was really honored to be a part of the coalition that you and others have been leading and doing years of work to prepare for. And we're taking a big swing with this constitutional amendment. And of course, Virginia makes it not easy to amend the state constitution. It is a full 2-year plus process. So we've gone through the first session, and it cleared both chambers. The governor does not have a say in the constitutional amendment process, this governor or any governor. So we've gotten through the first year, and now there has to be an intervening election. So the entire House of Delegates is up for re-election this year, 2025. The General Assembly will come back next year. The exact same language, not a comma changed, has to go through again through this new body. And then if that happens, it goes on the ballot in 2026. So it's a big lift.
Yeah.
What will this mean? What will this mean for Virginia and Virginians if this passes?
Virginia is an outlier in the country. We are the only state that allows the decision to be made by one person. We were one in three states who permanently disenfranchised individuals who lost their right to vote unless a governor intervened. But what this does, and for people who think this is a partisan issue, it's not. We have fought for this constitutional amendment, and I'll say we as the coalition because I'm a baby in the fight. Nolef Turns has only been around 9 years this year. The fight preceded me. So it's been going on almost 2 decades, and there are giants who kind of came before me. The late Senator Yvonne Miller, and I'm leaving out Senators William Robinson Sr. and Jr., who initially put in the first restoration of rights constitutional amendments. And this was like in 83, 84 maybe. This has been going on for a long time before I was around. But what ended up happening, Governor Northam reinstated the rights of 69,045 Virginians who were on probation in the moment because we had a 7 a.m. against my free will privileges and elections meeting, and legislators were educated about the fact that Virginia had indefinite probation, which meant that when individuals were sentenced to indefinite probation, they could not vote. And the only person who could determine whether or not they were released from parole or probation was a probation officer based on, petitions and things like that. My ex-husband, happily ex-husband, was 15 at the time he was incarcerated and tried as an adult, and he was sentenced to 74 years. And it turned out, he was innocent of some of the things that he had taken like credit for, because as a juvenile who was placed in a situation with no attorney, no adult in the room, he was kind of coerced into confessing to some things that he was not guilty of. Ultimately, was acquitted of some things, and he was released after 10 years. He came home for about a year and a half, got a violation, a new crime, and ended up doing 8.5 more years. So at the age of 36, he had done 18.5 years, had done more time in prison than out as an adult, and he was sentenced to indefinite probation. And the legislators had no idea. They didn't know anything about it. They got on a call, text Governor Northam and said, hey, can we get these people off of probation? And a couple of weeks passed because you can't just do a blanket restoration. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. The governor reinstated 69,045 people in that moment, and it was historic. And a lot of groups who've been doing restoration rights work previously said, oh, we thought the process was automatic. And you'll hear a lot of reporters say, the process was automatic. It's never been automatic. It's always been an application process that has to be vetted through the sitting governor.
So this, if assuming the constitutional amendment goes through, assuming it is approved by the voters, this would be automatic, right? That one leaves their jail or prison and get their rights back. I assume there's paperwork involved and maybe some lag time, but there's no application, there's no governor making a decision about it.
Automatic.
They finish their time and they get their rights back.
Walking out of the doors of physical bondage and the rights will be reinstated. Walking out of a courthouse, your rights will be reinstated. And there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of chatter about what about the victims? What about restitution? What about fines and fees? Virginia has a process where fines, fees, and restitution, mandatory, have to be paid back before a person can be released from parole or probation. So there are people who are on parole and probation right now who can vote based on Governor Northam's actions in 2021, who still are responsible for fines, fees, and restitution. It is not an alleviation of responsibility. It is not that a person is not accountable for what they have done. They are still responsible for fines, fees, and restitution. That is a huge conversation that we hear from the other side, that people are never held accountable. You still have to deal with these 46,000 collateral consequences when you have this conviction, when you have this arrest sometimes. So it is not the same situation. And being able to participate in the civic process, make decisions about who represents your children on school boards or who represents you in the state house and things like that are necessary. It reduces recidivism. There are reports that show that when people are fully restored and not going back to the vestige of Jim Crow, which is where felony disenfranchisement really started. It was never about public safety. It was never an issue about making sure that people are held accountable. It was to make sure that newly freed slaves could not participate in the process. That's where felony disenfranchisement got its start. And we are notoriously known for having slavery start on the banks of Jamestown in Williamsburg. We got rid of things like lynching, kinda. We got rid of things like poll taxes and literacy tests and all of these things, but we kept felony disenfranchisement, and it is well past time to remove it from our Constitution and make sure that we welcome people back who are leaving incarceration. And if we care about community, if we care about not spending so much money on social services programs and making sure that people can live in a self-sufficient manner, then they have to be able to participate in this process.
That's right. That's right. So I think good, responsive government is twofold, right? It's making sure that people have the opportunity, the right, the access to the vote, and a removal of barriers between them and a ballot, and then putting systems in place that make sure that those votes translate into representative representation. And I think that's where groups like us come in, right? The issues we work on, fair redistricting and making sure that citizens are engaged and trying to implement systems like ranked choice voting. I feel like we're the next in the chronological line, from the work that the coalition does, making sure that Virginians have the right to vote and that they know where to go and when to go and what all of their options are. And Virginia's made some incredible strides in the last couple years on early voting, same day registration, no excuse absentee voting, drop boxes, and really have come up in the world of voting access. And now we want to make sure that all of that work to get someone's vote heard translates into the kind of government that has to be responsive to people. So I'm so excited that we get to be part of your coalition, and we're so grateful for all of the work that you do and that the other partners in this space do, and again the giants whose shoulders we're all standing on. So thank you for all of your time, all of your work, all of your knowledge, the numbers and procedures that you just have at your fingertips. Always. I mean, ask her about election administration. The woman knows everything. So we're just so grateful for you, Sheba. Thank you so much for being on our couch.
I definitely appreciate you all, and we need everybody to be involved. This is not an easy process. This is something that will go to the voters in November of 2026, and there will be a lot of commentary around why it's not a good thing or why it shouldn't happen, because um, we see a lot of people hold on to the past, and we see a lot of people deter away from what the real issue of felony disenfranchisement is. But the fact is that we want every eligible voter to be able to participate in the process. We want people to be heard. We want them to have the things that they need to not just survive but thrive. It is bigger than a vote, but it is necessary so that our communities have what they need. And I am always grateful for our partners. I can't forget Election Protection, 866 Our Vote, who also make sure that not only do people have access, but they have protections in place. We've seen all of the attacks on voting rights, and we will no doubt see a lot more in the days, months, and years to come. Um, it is necessary for all of us to be at the table and have a voice in this. So, I was kind of thrust into this because of my very nerdy way of keeping the numbers retained in my brain. But this is about everybody in the state, and we're gonna make it happen.
How can people learn more about No Left Turns?
No Left is spelling backwards, and it's No Left Turns Inc. on all social media. So NolefTurnsInc on all social media. Um, we're always all over the state. Will there be an education tour this summer? If people want to get involved, absolutely hit us up, and we'll go from there. But we absolutely need everybody to be involved, follow, support, and get involved. Don't make me do all the things.
On all the levels, too. You referenced local elections earlier, and it, we got 3 more years before a presidential election, and that does not mean that anybody gets a break. We've got to pay attention every day to every election. Every level of government impacts your daily life. Promise. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
Absolutely. Thanks.